All right, gonna do a little sound check here first. See if we're coming through. And I think we're good. All right. So, we're going to get started with our little coffee talk here. This is a complete fly-by-night enterprise because I just decided to jump on after a day of finishing up some coursework here in Columbia, Missouri, where I've been for the last year. A lot of you know that already. But I decided to take one summer class, and so my summer break is officially going to begin tomorrow. So before I go get my workout in, I decided to do a little coffee chat. I have no idea, what I'm going to say, but we'll find out. This is my afternoon coffee. So, where are we at here? Okay. So, anybody who comes on here, if you want to join me, you can actually come on to the live YouTube stream. You can join me. I'll send you the Zoom link because that's all I'm using right now. I'm just coming at you with Zoom. But if you are interested in coming on, I'll send you the link. You just have to let me know in the chat. Hold on 1 second here. All right. I've over the last year or so, I've graduated into having to wear reading glasses now, so that's the sign of my age. All right. All right, so there's quite a few things we could talk about. There's a lot going on in the news cycle, of course. One of the things that keeps coming up in my feeds is the whole supposed controversy over critical race theory in education. And this is a topic that I happen to be pretty familiar with, given the fact that I've been teaching for 18 years in a variety of schools, mostly what we call Title I schools. And I've worked in California. As a teacher, I've taught in California, Colorado, Texas, and Hawaii, and Missouri. So I think I have a pretty good idea of what the education landscape looks like, sort of in a lot of diverse areas. And on top of that, of course, I've been in education and in higher education, and that work has primarily been in social theory, literacy, something called critical literacy, which I'm sure is next on the chopping block for the political pundits who talk about theory without talking about theory. And that's really, I guess, the biggest point that I would make on that topic, and that is, the people who throw words around like critical race theory now, they do so, of course, without providing any of the theory itself. So they have these caricatures of some of the concepts that may or may not have been developed or emerged from these theories, and then they just and everybody's repeating the same sound bites over and over. So for those of us who actually deal with the theory, as far as being researchers and truly engaging with the ideas, it's easy for a lot of researchers and those who are educated on the topic to just sort of laugh it off. And I think for many years that was the case. It's like, prior to this whole CRT thing even becoming a public phrase, but whenever someone would deal or be talking about the concepts that come out of CRT in a variety of forms, researchers, or I guess what I'm getting at is when we talk about this, or when we think about what does it mean to say that you cannot use critical race theory in your classroom? Like, what does that mean when nobody knows what CRT is actually? And so if one good thing could come out of this is that people will some people will be steered to find out what it actually is. I'm a bit of a pessimist on that, though, because generally what happens is people just follow the media, and that doesn't matter whether you're a conservative or a liberal. That's just the way it is. Now there's a spectrum in there, and there are studies that show that certain types of people that lean conservative or liberal have various aptitudes when it comes to media literacy and things like that. But so that would fuel some of my pessimism about what I think will happen. But the opportunities are there. So there's nothing deterministic about any of this. People decide what they want to do. They have the freedom to decide what they want to do. Even though when you're surrounded by misinformation, it's less likely that more people will engage in the work that it takes. It is work to use discernment when engaging with all the messages that we're hit with, day in and day out. So, but when it comes to, say, classroom practices, it's a real dangerous move to start saying you're going to legislate, that you can talk about this and you can't talk about that. And the irony, of course, is that it's generally those on the conservative side that talk mostly about individual freedoms and rights and that sort of thing. I mean, this is an ad nauseum for anybody who are familiar with the subject, and it's a boring subject actually for those who wish that we could do something different when it comes to collectively how we think. For those of us who can see beyond these very limited ideological constructs that make up our society, this sort of mythology that comes with oversimplicity, and really it's just an excuse that we don't want to think. It's a laziness. It reflects a lot of our consumer fueled mindsets that, even here and now on social media, we are the product, right? And our identities are enmeshed in all of this commercialized experience, but also the ideologies that are behind it. And this is why we can be in the year 2021 and still have a certain amount of the population uninformed about so many things when we have more access to information. So anyone who thinks that having more access to information solves our problem, it really doesn't. Because you have to know how to navigate once the floodgates are open to any bit of information, that anybody can jump on here and do what I'm doing right now. You got a camera and a channel, and you just throw yourself out there. And it's a strange world of what gets picked up and what trends and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, we're not facing a dearth of access to information. We're inundated with information that you have to have a certain skill set to be able to navigate through. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about being an elitist, that you have to have a college degree, in order to have this discernment, or it's some special skill. It's actually very difficult for people of all, levels of literacy and that sort of thing. So by no means am I saying, well, if you're higher educated, that you're somehow divorced from the ideological constructs which influence our decisions, how we think, our attitudes, our predispositions towards people, all that kind of thing. And so everyone has to practice discernment and be careful. And so to that end, it's not an invalid criticism that comes from, say, certain conservatives towards, the ideological rigidity or of people on the left, for example, or who would be considered on the left by the majority. What is it then that are reacting to? Well, they're reacting to the fact that a lot of times the people of the opposite ideology are just as informed by the same simplistic, oversimplistic, and non-thinking ideological constructs so it doesn't really matter where you are on the political spectrum. And I know there are some who would argue, well, but it's proven that, those on the left are higher educated and all that kind of stuff. But I'm always wary of those kind of statistical analysis and stuff like that, because, some of the stupidest people I've ever met in my life, they do have higher degrees and that sort of thing. I've met doctors who I think are complete idiots, and I have friends and people that I really admire and respect, some who are semi-literate and not literate at all. I mean, wisdom is not necessarily directly connected to your level of education. I think everybody knows that, because there's a difference between, intellectualism and higher analytical thinking, all that kind of stuff. There's a difference between that and wisdom. You can be very wise and very simple at the same time. And I think that some of those on the right who are criticizing, they say Democrats and stuff like that, but they're really looking at those who are more on the, say, liberal or beyond critical side of things. They're basically making a complaint that you're overcomplicating things, and there is some legitimacy to that claim. And what is the reaction often for those of us who disagree with conservatives? It's usually mutual disdain, mockery, those kind of things. So if we want to, evolve, change the way that we could do things, it's always there. So there's nothing deterministic about it. Like this trajectory that we're seeing right now play out, which is really unhealthy, but it's basically stuck on this hamster wheel of sensationalism and mudslinging. We won't move past that without really thinking about how much does ideology affect us. And with that, I'm gonna move off that topic and do what I said I was gonna do and have some coffee. If for whatever reason you stumble across this video later, I don't know why you're watching it, but you can learn more about myself, what I do, the various things I am, and I have a couple channels at avipenhallow.com. It's AVIPENHOLLOW.com. You can go there. There's probably links to it off this channel as well if you want to learn a little bit more. So last night, I put out a couple videos / podcasts of an interview I did a few months ago with a friend of mine named Father Samuel Davis. Now, he is from New Jersey, and he's a priest in the Orthodox Church in America. And so I did a little piece at the beginning of that show that talked about how many Americans, when you think about, church, God, religion, there are certain images that come to mind depending on our experience, but because our experience has largely been informed, at least for the most part, by, say, European-influenced Protestantism and, some Catholicism. And, of course, our religious diversity has grown over time. But a lot of people, when they think church and religion, there's a certain Bible Belt, words like that come to mind. These are things that are so ingrained in us, we don't really think about them or question them. So I brought Father Samuel on to do a couple things. One, to introduce some of the ideas of the Orthodox Church and some of the historical developments of it in America, why it is different from what we would consider mainstream Christianity, and more people are discovering it, and they're discovering it in different ways. So, for example, back in the 80s, I believe, or 90s, there was an entire evangelical church with a guy named Peter Gilchrist. I'm really pulling from my memory now. And he took several people, he himself and other leaders in his organization, and these are Protestant evangelicals, and they started studying the Orthodox Church, or the ancient church. And they decided to join. They decided to convert to it. And so there's a whole book he wrote, Father Peter Gilchrist wrote, called Becoming Orthodox. And this spurred on a lot more movements that followed it. And I used to be a part of one such seeking movement, and I'm currently still ordained and functioning in a jurisdiction that grew out of this interest. But Father Samuel is someone who went into what we would say the Orthodox proper, a canonical Orthodox church, and became ordained a priest. And he has a very unique perspective because he grew up as a missionary child from Panama. He's a Panamanian immigrant. And so you can see that video. It's on my channel. And it's Proximity Portal episode number 5. So I just put it out last night. It's 2 parts because we ended up talking for almost 2 hours. It's a fascinating story because there are not too many black priests in the Orthodox Church in the West. There are many black Orthodox priests in parts of like in Africa and in other areas of the world, but in the United States, we typically think of Orthodox as Greek or Russian, even though there are other Oriental Orthodox churches here. We call them Oriental Orthodox. It's just the name that's even self-attributed to those groups. So be careful with our words. But these are churches that come from places like Ethiopia and Egypt, and sometimes it's called the Coptic Church. And these are also very ancient churches and very similar in beliefs to the larger Eastern Orthodox jurisdictions. Why am I talking about all that? Well, Father Samuel addresses a couple issues in there, and he and I share a mutual friend who has since passed. His name is Archbishop Varon Ash, who was really climbing in notoriety back in the early 2000s, late 90s. He was a Pentecostal preacher who converted to become Orthodox, and then spurred a lot of interest among Pentecostal and charismatic churches about, well, what is this Orthodoxy? And so Father Samuel actually came across Varon Ash, and he tells the story in episode 5. So if you're interested in that, check that out, and how that influenced some of his subsequent decisions. And then finally, Father Samuel addresses the issue of a lot of ministers and pastors from the Protestant tradition who get interested in Orthodoxy, but maybe not for the right reasons. For example, they like how they dress. Maybe they like, hey, let's add some smoke, to our services and stuff like that. And they like to put on the clothes that the Orthodox wear, but they really are not historically connected or even theologically or doctrinally connected. And so he talks a little bit about that. So if you're interested, look at that episode. It's episode number 5. Now the show, The Proximity Portal, is, it's going very slow because I'm a doctoral student. I don't have a lot of time to broadcast, and there's so many things I want to address and talk about, but I just don't have the time right now. So the previous episodes before that are very different than this one about Father Samuel. And my goal, I think, over the next year or so, because I'm continuing to do research and I'm teaching, so is just to jump on, once in a while and maybe share a little bit of what my research is. For example, last year I wrote a research article on patriotic education. Now that was before a lot of this stuff started happening in the news cycle. And so now I'm thinking, maybe I need to polish that one up a little bit and just put it out there. Initially I was going to look to publish it somewhere, but I think time-wise, I think I would rather just get it out there, but we'll see. But it was about patriotic education and how many of us subscribe to a master narrative. And by that, we just mean, again, it goes back to this ideological construct of what we think is even real. What do we think? We hear these words: capitalism, socialism, communism, and of course, our environment determines a lot what our interpretive lens is going to be. So when it comes to patriotic education, I wrote this article that addresses where does that come from, and why is there resistance to revising the historical narrative to reflect reality, as opposed to the very simplistic and one-dimensional narrative, the official doctrine, of what we have to believe. And some people think, well, because if you look at these diverse perspectives, people are going to hate the nation and hate America and all that. And I understand that, but is that reason enough not to be truthful? I mean, so these are things to think about. I mean, think about as a parent, you know, and yeah, is this a situation where you're like a parent and you got to tell lies to your children so that they, you know, uh, don't figure things out and get angry? I mean, the problem is people are going to find out anyway. I mean, people know, especially those who are trying to say, hey, you know, our stories have existed alongside this master narrative since time immemorial. And, but they're just not told. They're told by us, you know, in our own context and that sort of thing. And every once in a while, okay, you'll evolve a little bit and allow some of the narrative in, as long as it's circumscribed by the master narrative. And I can understand why people are afraid of that. It's the same reason people are, you know, afraid to, I don't know. I mean, it's the same fears that people face in their personal lives, scared to go out on a limb and see what's out there. You know, no, I just want to stay at this job because it's secure, and you know, I don't want to rock the boat. So, you know, a lot of people, that's how they are, you know, and so if they're that way individually, they're going to be that way collectively. So people are not going to want to evolve. People are not going to want to expand the narrative, especially if that upsets how they look at the world. You know, people, you know, there's a lot of people who just want to think that, you know, the past is the past, doesn't have any effect on the present. And most importantly, don't call me a racist. You know, like, that's like, it's, I mean, it's sad really, but it is what it is. They're more concerned about what somebody might call them than they are like what's you know, what's real, or what are other people experiencing. You know, it's a very self-centered way of looking at the world. And then when other people voice a difference, they're attacked as being self-centered, you know. Or it's hard if you step back from it. If you're from the dominant culture, you know, if you're white, middle class, and you take a step back and really think about what that sounds like, it sounds ridiculous to everyone else. And it's like, it's embarrassing, really. I mean, and there's a complete ignorance, you know. But I do think, though, sometimes deep down people feel it. They know it, and it disturbs them, and they know what's coming, and they're afraid of it because, and this is where I'm going to leave off today. There is a difference between reconciliation and reckoning. Those are two different concepts. And a lot of people love that word reconciliation. I do too. Because it's, you know, healing, and, you know, we're getting over, you know, past relationships or things that went wrong and that sort of thing. And reconciliation, you know, of course, is a positive thing. When two entities, two people come together, they mend anything that offenses that they've done towards one another. Reconciliation is a good thing. But what if the two people involved in the conflict were not coming at it from a place of, we both did something to each other? There are cases in which there are victims and perpetrators. Now, when it's a clear case, if just think of a situation where there is a clear perpetrator and a clear victim of a crime. It's clear. The motives were just, you know, person A wanted something, person B had it, so person A takes it. Be it conquest, be it robbery, be it, even murder. For the offender, the perpetrator, and the victim, there's not reconciliation, because reconciliation implies that the original state of being in the relationship, there was a reciprocity, there was a mutuality, there was a footing upon which nothing's ever equal, but there was a footing on which there was an understanding on each side, right? That the relationship was defined in a sense of mutuality, a recognition of one another. But in acts of violence, of genocide, and slavery, theft, these are not acts of just, whoops, I did something wrong, please forgive me, let's reconcile over this. In order for there to, and what is reconciliation at the end of the day? Reconciliation is, bringing together two things, two people, two countries, that there's some sort of enmity there because of an offense. And if you're ever in a relationship, you know that there's constantly offenses that are going on. The difference, though, between offense and oppression, there's a spectrum there, and it's vastly different. Today we have people who want to treat genocide as in the same category as saying an unkind word to another, saying something out of frustration or hurt. They may not realize that's what they're doing, but that's what they're doing. You can't take genocide and put it in the same category as calling someone stupid and talk about reconciliation and moving on. What we're talking about is something fundamentally different. When there was not a mutuality or reciprocity at the beginning of the interaction between people or peoples, and there was an offense that was not just a minor violation, but we're talking something severe: killing, pillaging, stealing. We're no longer talking about reconciliation. To come to terms with those things, you need first a reckoning. Reckoning means that the offense, the consequences of that offense, those are brought to the table. They are brought out in the open, and they're discussed openly, and it hurts because you are reflecting violence. It should hurt. You're reflecting genocide, violence. And unless there is a reckoning, there can be no healing. I won't call it reconciliation because we talked about this on one of the earlier episodes of the Proximity Portal with my friend Jason McNair. He brought that up. He's like, there's some people who said we were never on the same page in the first place. So if you were never on the same page in the first place, how can there be reconciliation? There has to be a reckoning of what were those differences comprised of and why. And what are we doing to amend? See, and amend is different than making amends. Can sometimes be a part of reconciliation, and that's probably something it shares then with reckoning. But making amends and reconciling, to a reckoning are two different things. In that sense, there has to be a recognition. Now, sometimes there has to be a reckoning and to create reconciliation. And that's not a contradiction to what I just said, because I'm just saying that in some cases, it's not reconciliation that we need. It's reckoning, and then a moving forward towards a mutuality and a reciprocity that wasn't there in the beginning. That's not reconciliation. That's reckoning. It's bringing to the table. All right, and for those who think that time heals all wounds and that sort of thing, not without a reckoning. It doesn't. And the fact that every step of the way of reckoning in the United States history, for example, is met with resistance. It has to be fought for. That's different than reconciliation too, because if you have to fight for every single aspect of towards getting a mutuality and a reciprocity, then that's not reconciliation. Reconciliation is when there's a reckoning. It emerges. It's mutually acknowledged. Now, between individuals, of course, this is a little bit easier. There have been terrible, terrible acts of violence and offenses between people, and people have reconciled. But again, this would have been, it's just a different starting point. And so I think, there's a lot we can do. And I'm interested in more of changing the story. I'm interested in changing the stories that we tell ourselves, what we can and can't do. We know that at the end of the day that everything's a story. A border, and stories aren't bad. It's just some stories are better than others. But the story of the border, for example, is a story. Now, you can erect a physical wall, but the border itself it's a concept. It's it's there because of a lot of different factors. But borders themselves, at the end of the day, there are none. Doesn't mean there aren't differences of people, places, climate, and all that other kind of stuff, but we are stuck in this idea that there of rigidity when it comes to what is possible. And the irony of that is those who don't want to look at history and include other narratives, they want to keep the master narrative. Those guys always talk about the brilliance, say, of the founders of the United States and that sort of thing. And I do think, intellectually, and there were some very brilliant people there, of course. And the creativity and the American experiment, so for that time period, creativity, revolutionary action, and everything is to be honored and revered. But it's not to be honored and revered now. Now it's a threat, to that. Nobody thinks that way. And it's not a liberal or conservative issue, because both liberals and conservatives subscribe to the same master narrative. That's what I wrote about in the article on patriotic education, which I will share. I'll put a link to it below here when I'm done. But, liberals are just as much a part of this master narrative. If you need any evidence of that, you just listen to someone like, Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, any sort of Democrat politician, and they're always going to say the same narrative, but they focus more on this sort of, more perfect union, and we're reaching and striving towards this ideal, and that we've always done that. It's a story. Were there times where the public has reached forward and tried to be creative? Of course, but for the most part, all of any sort of progress in that sense, when it comes to the progress of ideals, be they good or bad, it always meets with resistance. So there's power is always at play. For those of you who know Foucault, that's definitely the essence of what he talks about. So anyway, that's my coffee talk. Earlier today, I was watching Kevin McCarthy and his theatrics it's all theatrics, okay? For anybody involved in that theater, it's theater. And he's pretty good at what he does. It's just awful to think that you would, I don't know. I don't understand how these guys think it's okay to manipulate people as long as they get what they want, and it's sad to me to watch it play out, but anyway, it's time for my workout, so I'm going to sign off, and in the future, when I jump on here, I am going to start doing it a little more regularly, I think. Invite people on, because you can certainly join me on the Zoom broadcast as well, and we'll have more interesting things to talk about, I think, in the future. So anyways, you all have a good night. This is Avi Penhallow, and the podcast I do is called The Proximity Portal, so please check it out, avipenhallow.com. And if you've endured this little talk with me, make sure that you so I know that you're here and you appreciate it, and I'll talk to you guys soon.